Welcome F11 members to the latest of my video tutorials on the fundamentals of post-production. For the September issue, issue 20, what I'd like to do is take you through the processing of a picture that hopefully you know well. It's featured as the cover of the composition tutorials, which hopefully you've all taken the opportunity of downloading free. It's quite an interesting picture to process, one that marries up all sorts of things we've talked about in future post-production tutorials, both in the raw conversion stage and exposure merging later in Photoshop. So let's start. Over two parts, I'm going to take you right through the process. First thing, of course, here's the raw image. Nothing been done to it yet, straight out the camera. Now if I go to the caption information, I've put that in, and this is the frame I'm going to develop. So first thing I do is open it up in the develop mode, and there you see the exposure. Now it was very fundamentally important that I captured all the information in one frame using this with this exposure, and there's quite a contrast range to handle. As you can see here, looking at the histogram display, there's a few shadows clipping. If I just hover my cursor over there, you can see the blue bits appearing here in the shadows, and there's just a few highlights indicated by tiny little red blobs, which are generally up here in the highlights, reflecting off the gold spires. But generally speaking, it's about as good as exposure as I possibly could have hoped to have made. Really only minimal clipping, but of course, as is, it looks a pretty dull and quite frankly dark and uninspiring picture. But that's what this game is all about: exposing in camera, giving us the ultimate flexibility to extract the best from all the information there in the raw file. So I'm going to make two different conversions of this image and then put them together in Photoshop later. First conversion we're going to make is ignoring the brighter top part of the frame here and just making this lower 2/3 of the frame look suitable for us, bright and colourful with the right contrast, and then come back and do a darker conversion for the top part of the frame. Now it's shot using the 17mm TSC tilt and shift lens. There you can see the exposure information, and I used a graduated neutral density filter to try and hold a bit of the contrast range. It's a 0.9 ND grad soft. I had to use soft because I didn't want a deliberate line across the top of that frame there, so that was pretty crucial. Nevertheless, the filter's really still, although I've held detail here, this bottom half looks pretty uninspiring. So let's get to work on the picture, and the first thing I look at, as usual, is my highlights and shadows. But in this particular case, the first thing we're going to do, the first conversion we're going to do, is concerned only really with the bottom 2/3 of this picture. So I'm not really concerned with those highlights, so I'm going to ignore them for now. Nevertheless, here a few shadows clipping, so the first thing I'm going to do is adjust my shadows. I take the slider here and go around about +5, and you can see up here that cursor indicates that shadows are no longer clipping. Okay, there's just a few, when I put my cursor over there, there's just a few blue bits still showing underneath here, but really that doesn't worry me unduly. After all, we don't expect to see in the darkest Burmese shadow, do we? Okay, so next thing I need to look at is the tone curve, and what I'm going to do is just select a medium contrast default setting there. Now it's made the image have more contrast, but the bottom of the frame still looks way too dark. In this particular case, I'm going to use the exposure slider to give me the kind of density that I want. and I'm ignoring the top of the frame here. I'm just looking at that bottom of the frame, and I would say round about, that's just a bit too far, as is that. I'm going to come back to about there, plus 1.07 ish. Looks about right. It's got some nice contrast. It's lifted the image, the bottom part of the frame there. So as you brighten a picture, it has the effect of reducing the saturation of the image, of the colors. So I'm just going to compensate for that by putting a touch of vibrance in, about plus 10, and that looks about right to me. Now next thing I do is come down and we go to look at the sharpening, and as usual I go here and I select this sharpen scenic. Okay, and I'm now just going to adjust the masking. Hold down Alt and slide this across until the black indicates where the mask is coming into effect, and only sharpening the bits that I want sharpening, not the even toned areas. And I reckon somewhere around about plus 14 is about right for that. Okay, well at that stage I'm now ready to export that image. The top part of the frame looks all burnt out, there's highlights clipping there, but the bottom part of the frame looks about how I want it to. I can and will fine tune it subsequently in Photoshop, but it's pretty close. So now I go Library, Export. I'm going to put it in a folder called Processed, a subfolder called Burma, rename it to Yang because it was shot in Yangon. Come down here, file format as always TIFF, 16-bit ProPhoto RGB color space. I'm not resizing it, the resolution is 300 dpi. No sharpening because I've done that I've adjusted that already in Lightroom, and I'm ready to export. Okay, so that's going. So what I'm going to do now is go back into develop mode. What we're doing here is essentially we're trying to extract every bit of information from that the dynamic range of the camera has managed to record. This was shot with the Canon 5D Mark III, and one of the great advantages of shooting RAW is the amount of information that you've got in that RAW file to really bring out the best in the picture. So now I'm just going to go to the tone curve and go back to linear. I'm going to take off for now that saturation, and I'm also going to take out the exposure, and now I need to look at my tone curve again, or particularly actually my highlights first. Now, because we're concerned not with the bottom part of the picture, I'm going to have a look at the top part of the frame, and just those few highlights clipping there are of some concern. So I'm going to use the highlight slider here and go down to until that red at the top up here is lost. I can come back just a touch there to about -19, and that takes care of my highlights. Next thing I want to do is again just put a touch of vibrance in the image, not much, but just a touch. I'd say around about there, and actually that's about it. I'm now looking at the top of that frame and saying, do I really want, is that about right? Actually I think it could go, just to give it a bit of oomph, just a touch darker. So I'm just going to use the tone curve to just slide that down to the right just a touch, so that sky and the gold in the spires has real bottle. And I'm now ready for that, so I'm going to export that. Okay, same setting, so it's going to go into the same folder. So there we have it, two different RAW conversions, one for the highlights, one for the shadows, to be merged subsequently. So I'm finished in Lightroom for now, so I'm just going to open up Photoshop, and I'm going to open those two images. And if I go up here, I go to where the image is stored, and it's in images, and it's in processed, and in a subfolder called Burma, and there they are. So I'm going to open up that one and that one. Okay, so now if I now go Window, Arrange, Tile, and it's 2 up vertically there, so the images are now there alongside each other, ready for me to work on. And at this stage we're ready to start putting them together in Photoshop, and we're going to do that in part 2 of this video tutorial. So I'll see you there.